Today we're going to go back to one of the four horsemen of atheism to finish something I started on a previous show, because I'm convinced that at least one of these famous atheists really didn't understand what he was reading, and maybe he even lied about it. Welcome to Authentic, the show where we examine what it means to live a genuine human existence. Which means that we unpack all kinds of topics, including things like ethics and psychology and epistemology and faith and, well, just about everything under the sun. And what we're going to do today is pick up on a topic that I just kind of left dangling on another episode, and it was, well, frustrating because in my typical blabbermouth fashion, I ran out of time before I could really finish what I was trying to say. So, if you missed the first part of this discussion, you might want to head on over to our website, vop.com, and look for Hitchens Wasn't Great Part 1. And that way, I won't have to review everything from last episode in this episode, which would mean that I run out of time yet again. What I will do is set the table by saying this. What we're talking about is Christopher Hitchens' best-selling book, God Is Not Great, a book that still sells to this day. Now, unfortunately, Hitchens died in 2011, so he can't defend himself against what I'm going to say. I freely admit that. Not that he would ever listen to this show. But it's not really Hitchens that really concerns me as much as the people who might actually read his book and think he's giving an accurate picture of religion or Christianity or the Bible, because he's not. Listen, I can absolutely respect an atheist who is calm and well-reasoned and is honest about the subject, and I have a number of good friends who absolutely fall into that category. But Hitchens appears to be less than honest, or at least if that's not the case, then he's nowhere near as well-informed as he thought he was. And we kind of looked at that a little bit on another episode, so you might want to go back and give that a listen. Today I want to pick up with his chapter on the reliability of the Old Testament, because he seems to be making a caricature of God and only presenting snippets of information that are removed from the context of the rest of the Bible. I believe I gave you a few examples last time, and then we zeroed in on the way that he ridicules the great moral contribution that the Hebrew people made to Western civilization, and that's the Ten Commandments. And it's here that we really find some holes in the way that Hitchens thinks. Some of you will remember that he called the first three commandments a prolonged throat clearing by God. And so we took a little time and asked a really important question. If God is real, and I happen to think he is, if God is real, do these three commandments make really good sense? And the answer was, well, yes, they do. If there is a God, and only one God, and he is loving, then the prohibition against serving something or someone else makes sense. You're actually jeopardizing your own well-being if you ignore that fact. The Creator God, according to the Bible, is the only source and only sustainer of life, and that makes it very important to be clear about the way you're going to relate to Him. Then we saw that a prohibition against taking God's name in vain isn't really just about careless language. It's about professing publicly to be God's child and then making a mockery of His name or His character through the way you behave, which was, interestingly, a huge part of Christopher Hitchens' complaint against religious people. He pointed out that the religious have behaved abysmally over the centuries, and I don't deny that. In fact, people who have listened to me over the years know full well I openly admit it. It's true, we have misbehaved. And if you take the time to read the Bible honestly, you quickly discover that the Bible never tries to hide the embarrassing behavior of God's people. In fact, their bad behavior is one of the biggest themes in the book. So, Hitchens is completely right about this. There are a lot of very toxic religious people, and I strongly suspect by the tone of his book that Mr. Hitchens had been exposed to more than a few of them. But in condemning the bad behavior of God's people, Hitchens is actually underlining the validity of the Third Commandment, which tells us that taking the Lord's name in vain is a sin. What that commandment is really driving at a fundamental level is people who pretend to represent God in front of the world, but then go out there and live like the devil. That brings dishonor to God's name. Hitchens' protest underlines that the commandment is valid. It serves an important purpose. But then he goes on to the fourth commandment, which for some reason he didn't lump together with the first three. And this is the commandment that deals with the Sabbath. Here's what he says about the Sabbath. He says, the fourth commandment insists on the observance of a holy Sabbath day and forbids all believers and their slaves and domestic servants to perform any work in the course of it. It is added that, as was said in the book of Genesis, God made all the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, leaving room for speculation as to what he did on the eighth day. I realize that I'm probably straining at gnats here, but that last statement kind of gives you an idea of the sarcastic flavor of the whole book. Hitchens is not a well-reasoned rebuttal of faith and definitely has the feel of a personal attack. I mean, there's absolutely no point in saying we don't know what happened on the eighth day because the pattern shown in the Bible is that once the seventh day, the day of rest, was over, the weekly cycle just started over again. What Hitchens is trying to do is make his readers think the story is completely silly before they ever have a chance to read it. But now that I've lodged that complaint against Hitchens, let me point out the real problem. He simply doesn't understand the nature of the Sabbath because he doesn't read it in light of the rest of the Bible. We have hundreds and hundreds of pages of very important commentary in the Bible on what those commandments mean, what they represent. But Hitchens conveniently ignores all of that, even though he insists quite firmly he knows what the Bible says. So let me just put the question like this. What in the world is wrong with a God who wants you to have a day off? Who wants you to use a little time each week to invest in a close and personal relationship with Him? That's the point of the Sabbath. For 6 days, human beings do what human beings need to do. But on the seventh, God says, listen, I want you to understand that at the end of the day, I've got your back. You don't have to earn my love. You already have it. You don't have to win the kingdom of heaven through your personal efforts because I've already won it for you. I made you, I gave you life, and I'm eager to spend time with you. The Sabbath is a day where you can quit trying and just be. And honestly, that's the picture you get when you study this commandment throughout the rest of the Bible. I mean, just consider the way that Jesus taught the fourth commandment. When the Pharisees condemned His disciples for picking a few heads of grain to eat on Sabbath as if they were performing some kind of strenuous farm labor, here's what Jesus says. And He said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Then on another occasion, He told His disciples, he who has seen me has seen the Father, which completely shuts down all those people who say that the God of the Old Testament was harsh and severe and completely different from Jesus. From the very beginning, the Sabbath was created as a gift for the human race. And you really have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to find something wrong with a God who gives you the gift of rest. I mean, just think about the way the world beats you up day in and day out, and ask yourself how many times you've been glad that you work around the clock 7 days a week. That's not how you were designed. And the God who made you, the God who loves you, recognizes this, and He simply asks you to come and rest with Him 1 day a week. It's a mandatory day off. How in the world anybody could be angry about that is beyond me. And frankly, I think it means you might have the wrong perspective about God in the first place. But now it's time for a break, so don't go away. I'm going to take a little rest, you take a little rest, and then we got a lot more stuff to talk about.
Dragons, beasts, cryptic statues. Bible prophecy can be incredibly vivid and confusing. If you've ever read Daniel or Revelation and come away scratching your head, you're not alone. Our free Focus on Prophecy guides are designed to help you unlock the mysteries of the Bible and deepen your understanding of God's plan for you and our world. Study online or request them by mail and start bringing prophecy into focus today.
You know, it occurs to me that it might be really useful to look at how the Ten Commandments are actually structured, because that might make all the difference in the world when it comes to understanding them. Let me show you something in a story from the New Testament where the religious leaders of the day were trying to trip Jesus up because they saw Him as a threat to their own authority. Here's what the Bible says. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him and saying, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" Now listen carefully to what comes next. Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Now, I've heard some people say that Jesus was replacing the Old Testament with that statement, as if the Old Testament had nothing to do with love. But look at this carefully, and you find the two tables of the Ten Commandments being explained in a world that had long forgotten why those commandments were given in the first place. The moral principles found in the Decalogue were simple and easy to understand, but the Pharisees had made them unbearably complicated and severe. They were so paranoid about breaking the law, which is what led to the Babylonian captivity, that they added 600 extra rules so that you couldn't even get close to breaking the commandments. What they did was to create a legalistic atmosphere that was really, really hard to live in. So when somebody asked Jesus what the greatest of the commandments was, he gave a remarkable answer. There are two. One of them is to love God, and the other is to love your neighbor as yourself. What Jesus gave us was a recipe for an authentic human existence, an easy way to live in harmony with God and your fellow human beings. And that's exactly what you find in the Ten Commandments. The first four deal with your relationship with God. Do not have other gods. Do not worship idols. Do not take God's name in vain, and spend the Sabbath day resting with God. That's how you show your love for God. Then the next 6 commandments outline a peaceful coexistence with your neighbors. Honor your parents. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness, and do not covet. That's how you love your neighbor. What Jesus is telling us is how to live with love. And you know, I've heard a lot of people grumble that God is just trying to ruin our fun with these 10 rules. But try to imagine a world where everybody just did those things. Nobody steals, nobody kills, nobody takes what doesn't belong to them, nobody cheats on a spouse, and nobody lies. I mean, imagine a world that isn't driven by greed and envy, where people actually respect each other. What in the world would be wrong with that? Absolutely nothing. What we get in the moral law of God is actually a picture of what God Himself is like. God says, "I want you to respect life because I respect life. I want you to be honest because I'm honest. I want you to respect covenant relationships like marriage because I respect covenant relationships." What God does in the Ten Commandments is reveal Himself, His own character, and He invites us to be remade in His image. So honestly, once you start to see that, it's hard to understand how anybody could hate the commandments unless they had no interest in being moral. Now, I completely understand. Lots of atheists are really good moral people. They really are. And Hitchens mentions that. But it's kind of beside the point, because what Hitchens is doing is lambasting these 10 moral principles as if there's something inherently wrong with them. And it's hard to see how that could possibly be true. I mean, here's the way that Hitchens characterizes the 10 Commandments. He says, it would be harder to find an easier proof that religion is man-made. There is first the monarchical growling about respect and fear, accompanied by a stern reminder of omnipotence and limitless revenge of the sort with which a Babylonian or Assyrian emperor might have ordered the scribes to begin a proclamation. Honestly, this is the part of Hitchens that's kind of mind-boggling. He's reading the same 10 Commandments that I've been reading to you, and he sees them as the unreasonable demand of a vengeful God, which tells me that either Hitchens never read the whole Bible, or he was so blinded by his own anger over some issue, something that happened, that it made him conveniently ignore the rest of the story. Or, another possibility, he's just being downright dishonest. And because he's dead, I guess we can't ask him about it. But I guess what I want for you is an honest understanding of what the Bible actually teaches. And Christopher Hitchens is not an honest introduction to the subject. Okay, let's keep forging ahead now because we have a little more time and Hitchens does make a few other assertions that really make no sense. After listing the Ten Commandments in a rather disdainful tone, here's what he says. Let me just read the whole quote to you first and then we'll circle back and just bring up a couple of points. He writes, "But however little one thinks of the Jewish tradition, it is surely insulting to the people of Moses to imagine that they had come this far under the impression that murder, adultery, theft, and perjury were permissible. The same unanswerable point can be made in a different way about the alleged later preachings of Jesus. When he tells the story of the Good Samaritan on that Jericho road, he is speaking of a man who acted in a humane and generous manner without obviously ever having heard of Christianity, let alone having followed the pitiless teachings of the God of Moses, who never mentions human solidarity and compassion at all." Well, here's what I need to ask. How in the world does Hitchens come to the conclusion that the moral law of God was suddenly sprung on the Jews as a huge surprise? You'd have to be willfully ignorant of the context leading up to Exodus 20 to come to that conclusion, because violations of those same moral principles are roundly condemned in the previous book, Genesis. Cain was condemned for murder. Jacob was disciplined for deceiving his family. Sexual immorality was considered a sin, and so on for hundreds of years leading up to the presentation of the tables of stone at Mount Sinai. These things have always been wrong, and they've always been wrong because God has always been there, and the moral guidelines in the law are a picture of what God is like. And honestly, it takes quite a bit of imagination to pretend that the Hebrews had no concept of sin before they received the tables of stone. I mean, if you want a really good summary of what sin is, you'll find it in 1 John 3 verse 4, where it says, "Whoever commits sin also commits lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness." The Old King James says, "Sin is the transgression of the law." And if there's one thing that's abundantly clear in the Bible, it's the fact that sin existed well before Moses and well before Mount Sinai. So, if sin existed, there must have been a moral law that people were breaking. But you know what Hitchens says actually goes deeper than that. And I do have to take another quick break, so hang on. I'll be right back after this.
Here at the Voice of Prophecy, we're committed to creating top-quality programming for the whole family, like our audio adventure series, Discovery Mountain. Discovery Mountain is a Bible-based program for kids of all ages and backgrounds. Your family will enjoy the faith-building stories from this small mountain summer camp and town. With 24 seasonal episodes every year and fresh content every week, there's always a new adventure just on the horizon.
Just before the break, I was looking at this unfortunate statement in Hitchens' book regarding the Ten Commandments, where he wrote this, "But however little one thinks of the Jewish tradition, it is surely insulting to the people of Moses to imagine that they had come this far under the impression that murder, adultery, theft, and perjury were permissible." The answer to that silly objection is pretty simple. It's not true. It's impossible to read the whole Bible and come to the conclusion that murder, adultery, theft, and perjury were ever permissible. So what he's doing is creating another straw man argument. He's stating something that was never true, never taught in the Bible, and then he's triumphantly knocking that argument over like a pigeon strutting around on a chessboard kicking over the pieces. He might be causing a lot of damage, but he's certainly not winning the game, and he's not even playing chess. And I guess what really bothers me about this is the way that Mr. Hitchens will not give God the same benefit of the doubt that he undoubtedly would give to a secular government. Just because everybody knows something is wrong doesn't mean that that wrong never needs to be codified, that it never needs to be stated. Because human beings are terribly flawed, and we are forever making huge messes. We all know murder is wrong, but some people still go and do it anyway. We know stealing is wrong, but some people still go out there and do it. Yet nobody's suggesting that we don't need a criminal code or law books because it's really, really obvious that we do. Look, when God delivered the Israelites from Egypt, they had just come out of long years of slavery while being immersed in a foreign culture with different gods. As he led the Israelites out of bondage, he established a covenant with them, basically saying, I will be your God, and you will be my people. And the moral law of God was the basis of that covenant. It describes what it means to be the people of God. God expected them to reflect His character and His values. It was only appropriate at that point in history to restate those principles and encode them in stone, the same way you spell things out when you sign a contract. Everybody knows that you should be honest when you sell a house, but you still pull out a document that spells out exactly what your agreement means. Even a neophyte in history knows that you have to review and restate the law of the land more than once, because those laws are the guidelines that hold civilization together. And the Ten Commandments were the laws that held the nation of Israel together. None of those moral principles came as a surprise to anybody. And so Hitchens is frankly arguing against something that was never, ever true. And when it comes to the story of the Good Samaritan, wow, did Hitchens ever miss the boat. When Jesus told that story, He was pointing out that the people who lived next door to Judea, the Samaritans, the people who didn't have the same privileges as Jerusalem, the people that were despised by those who professed to teach the true religion of God, well, Jesus was pointing out that the Samaritans understood God's moral principles better than they did. The Hebrews, the Jews in Jerusalem had made a perversion of the law because they made it loveless, but the Samaritans they despised as unclean garbage were actually closer to God than they were because they knew how to love. They were keeping the law while the Jews were breaking it. Remember, Jesus said that the easiest summary of the law is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. If anything, the Samaritan in the parable is naturally keeping the moral law while the professed children of God are defiantly breaking it. And that's the point of the story. And I guess it all boils down to this. If you want to read an atheist, at least read an honest one. Hitchens' book, to be honest, is more than disappointing. And Mr. Hitchens obviously had an axe to grind. He plays loose with the facts. He makes unfair caricatures out of the biblical teachings. He rips things out of context. He ignores parts of the Bible that completely contradict him. And he indulges in ridicule, sarcasm, and insults. This is a really sloppy book. And the fact that Mr. Hitchens calls the God of Moses pitiless and devoid of compassion is probably the biggest misrepresentation of them all. I mean, let's just consider the most famous verse in the whole Bible, which says, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through Him might be saved." Now tell me again about this so-called pitiless God, Mr. Hitchens. The fact is, you completely ignored the biggest theme in the Bible, and I think that for just a few moments, I'm going to let God Himself refute what you tried to make people believe. 1 John chapter 4 says this, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. In this, the love of God was manifested toward us, that God has sent His only begotten Son into the world that we might live through Him." And then you have this statement from the Old Testament, the book of Isaiah. "For the mountains shall depart and the hills be removed, but my kindness shall not depart from you, nor shall my covenant of peace be removed, says the Lord, who has mercy on you." Then you got this one from the book of Romans, which says, "For when we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet perhaps for a good man someone would even dare to die. But God demonstrates His own love toward us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." So no, Mr. Hitchens, you've been less than honest about the tone and tenor of the Bible. And I'll be right back after this.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like, Does my life really matter to God? And A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter most to you in each of the 26 Discover Bible Guides. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
You know, it's really too bad that Christopher Hitchens is gone now, because there was something about the world of religion that made him really angry about God, and he spent a lot of his time sort of fighting God, blaming God for whatever that something was. I know that his religious friends tried to reason with him on occasion because he says as much in his book, and while he valued those people's friendship, he never accepted what they were trying to tell him. And now he's gone, so we leave Mr. Hitchens in God's hands. But maybe you've been led to believe that the God of the Bible is angry and vindictive and unreasonable. And maybe the behavior of a religious person has made you more convinced that that's true. Listen, if you want to try and figure out what God is like from other people, I can guarantee that the church is going to make a mess of it over and over and over. I mean, the Christian church has burned heretics at the stake. We have driven so-called unbelievers out of their homes. We have treated other people as less than human, and we have been involved in very serious scandals. Which is why I want to encourage you to just go to the source. Just read the Bible for yourself. Not what people say about it, but actually pick it up and read it for yourself. If you want a little help getting started with that, we'll help you. Just visit VOP.com and click on the Study tab near the top of the page. I honestly think you'll be delighted with the free resources we have to help you read the Bible for all it's worth. We've got free study courses that will take you through all the major themes of the Bible. And right now, more than 1 million people have gone through this, finding meaningful answers. And if you've got a Bible question, consider hopping onto our other website, BibleInfo.com, to see if maybe we've already answered it. And if the answer's not there, if we haven't tackled it yet, ask us your question. We'll see if we can deal with it. But please, be honest about your search. Be honest with what the Bible actually says and what it doesn't say. Pick up a copy of the book and read it for yourself. I think you're going to be surprised by what's in there. Thanks for joining me again. I'm Shawn Boonstra, and this has been another edition of Authentic.